Washington Square Park, in the heart of Greenwich Village, awoke as it did every morning amidst the distant chirping of sparrows and the hurried bustle of the city. The iron benches still held the night's dew, and the sun had barely begun to filter through the tall ancient trees. It was a beloved spot for the neighbors, where routines seemed sacred. Children running around, elderly people strolling, and vendors setting up their stalls with hot coffee in disposable cups and steaming pretzels. Mr. Ernest, in his short-brimmed hat and with a cane he hardly needed to use, walked as he had been doing every morning for over 20 years. His steps were slow but steady, and his gaze, though tired, still lingered curiously on every familiar corner. His ritual was clear: take 2 laps around the park, sit on the same bench in front of the bandstand, and read the newspaper while drinking a black coffee from Mrs. Rosie. That morning, however, something interrupted his routine. On the third bench to the right of the bandstand, right next to the crooked oak tree that the children used as a hiding place, was someone he had never seen before. A young man covered by a dirty, torn gray blanket slept curled up, barefoot, and with a serene expression on his face. His long, tangled hair and sparse beard gave him a strange, almost timeless air. Mr. Ernest stopped abruptly. It wasn't uncommon to find homeless people in the city. He himself had learned to look the other way. Not out of cruelty, but out of habit. The city teaches you to harden yourself. But something about that boy stopped him from going any further. He watched him for a long time. There was something in his expression, a calmness that contrasted with the noise that was beginning to fill the park. Vans passed by, children shouted, vendors argued over prices, and that young man slept as if nothing could disturb him, as if he were at peace, as if he were protected. Mr. Ernest frowned. An image came to his mind, uninvited. An old painting his wife had in the living room, where Jesus slept in a boat while the storm raged. "Trust, I am with you," she always said when he despaired. He looked at the young man again, and yes, he murmured without realizing it. He felt foolish. What kind of thought was that? Comparing him to Jesus, when he was just a vagrant. He could be high, sick, or worse. Maybe he pretended to be asleep to rob the distracted. Mrs. Lucy, his neighbor, always said those boys were dangerous. But Ernest's heart beat differently. There was something he couldn't explain. It wasn't compassion. It was a mixture of interest and an old, forgotten feeling he hadn't felt in a long time. He decided to stay a few more minutes. He pretended to read the newspaper, but his eyes never left the young man. Around him, life went on. The noise, the greetings, the smell of freshly baked bread at the corner cafe, and he stood there, motionless, as if that moment contained something sacred. And if you're seeing something that not everyone sees, he thought, if this story has already touched your heart, subscribe to the channel for more stories. The morning breeze blew lightly, slightly lifting the blanket that covered the young man. Mr. Ernest thought for a moment he saw a scar on the boy's side. He leaned over to get a better look, but at that moment the young man stirred, turning towards the back of the seat. The old man startled. The movement had startled him, but the boy only murmured something unintelligible and remained quiet. Mr. Ernest took a deep breath, turned and walked away, but couldn't stop looking back several times. Something told him he would return the next day, and that his life would never be the same. He returned home that morning with a nagging feeling in his chest. His house, a simple one-story building in the neighborhood, seemed quieter than usual. The wooden door creaked as it closed, and the grandfather clock struck 8. Everything was in its usual place, but he didn't sit in the worn leather armchair where he usually sat with his wife in the afternoons. She read. He carved figures in wood. Carpentry was his life. For more than 40 years, he had worked in a small workshop near the market, making everything from furniture to crosses for chapels. He had steady hands, but his soul had grown increasingly fragile since Mary was gone. He remembered the last time he went to Mass. It had been more than 6 years. Since Mary's death, he had stopped attending church. He no longer found solace in prayers or sermons. Every time he walked through the doors of a church, he felt a deeper emptiness, as if God had abandoned him with her. But that morning, the image of the young man sleeping on the pew wouldn't leave his head. He didn't know why, but it had stirred something within him. It wasn't just pity. It was something older, perhaps connected to the words Mary had repeated so many times. God speaks in silences, Ernest, in the faces of the forgotten. He sighed and got up to make coffee. While the water boiled, he looked at the shelf where the pieces he had meticulously sculpted still rested. A carved Virgin Mary, a Saint Joseph, a crucified Christ whose face he never finished, all covered in dust. He poured the coffee and took it to the living room. The air smelled of loneliness. "I'm getting old," he said softly, as if speaking to someone who was no longer there. "And I don't know if I have the strength to get involved." Again, she spoke to Mary, to the absence, to the echo of her own thoughts. She felt that any new connection was a risk, not only physical, but emotional. Because when you've lost so much, you're afraid to open your heart. She looked out the window. Outside, the sky was beginning to lighten. The colors of the morning gained strength on the rooftops. In his block, everything had a slow, almost melancholic rhythm. Neighbors passed by, greeting each other with a nod. Dogs barked, and time seemed to drag on like a long shadow. Mr. Ernest got up and went to the small back room where he still kept his workbench. It smelled of dry wood and old oil. On the table, covered by a cloth, lay the piece of cedar that had gone untouched for years. He removed the cloth and ran his hand over the surface. It was soft, warm, as if it had been waiting for him. Without knowing why, he picked up the chisel and began to trace one line, then another. He had no plan. He let his hands guide his body. Each cut in. The wood brought forth images of the young man, his dirty feet, his calm face, the scar on his side. "Emmanuel," he murmured. He didn't know where that name came from, but something inside him screamed with certainty. Emmanuel, God with us. He dropped the tool and remained silent. His heart pounded. He returned to the room and drank his now cold coffee. An idea began to take shape. What if he went back to the park the next day, not to talk, just to observe and confirm that he hadn't imagined everything, that the young man was really there, and that there was still something to discover? The following morning dawned with an overcast sky, low clouds threatening rain. Mr. Ernest woke up before the alarm clock. It wasn't common. She dressed slowly, like someone preparing for a quiet but important event. She took a paper bag, put inside a cinnamon roll that Mrs. Martha had given her the day before, and filled an old thermos with coffee. He didn't know if the young man would still be there, but something inside him clung to the possibility. Upon arriving at Washington Square Park, the first thing he did was search for the bench, the third to the right of the bandstand, and there it was. The young man was sleeping in the same position, the gray blanket wrapped around him. This time he was trembling slightly, as if the night chill had seeped into his bones. Mr. Ernest approached slowly, without making a sound. He stopped a few steps away. "Good morning, young man," he said in a soft voice. The young man slowly opened his eyes. His gaze was calm, without fear. He looked at him as if he recognized him, even though they had never exchanged a word. He nodded silently. "I brought something. It's not much, but it's warm." Mr. Ernest placed the bag with the pastry and the thermos on the bench. The young man looked at the two of them, and then at him. A slight smile, almost a gesture, crossed his face. "Thanks, sir," he said in a hoarse voice, almost a whisper. His tone was serene, polite, without a trace of resentment or shame. He picked up the bread with thin, dirty, but firm hands and ate slowly. Then he took a sip of coffee and closed his eyes, as if it were a sacred gift. "Do you have a name?" asked Mr. Ernest, without yet sitting down. "Emmanuel," replied the young man, without hesitation. Mr. Ernest felt a shiver run down his spine. It was the same name that had appeared to him without explanation the day before, the same one that had sprung from his lips as if he already knew it. "And you?" Emmanuel asked. Ernest. They remained silent for a few seconds. The activity in the park grew. Vendors set up their stalls. Children passed by with backpacks on their backs. Seagulls or pigeons chirped on the wires, but between the two of them, everything seemed suspended in another time. "Have you been here long?" Mr. Ernest asked. "Time is different when you have nowhere to go," Emmanuel replied, without sadness. Mr. Ernest lowered his gaze, unsure what to say. He wanted to ask more, but there was an impression in the young man's manner of speaking that every word should be measured. He was no ordinary boy. "Don't you have family?" he finally asked. "I have brothers everywhere," said Emmanuel, looking at the sky. "But few remember that we are brothers." The phrase hung in the air like a distant echo. Mr. Ernest sat down beside him, leaving a safe distance between them. He picked up the newspaper out of habit, but didn't open it. He merely held it, while glancing at the young man. "You shouldn't sleep here. It's dangerous," he said after a while. Emmanuel nodded, but didn't reply. He continued to drink his coffee as if he were in no hurry. "Are you hungry?" asked Mr. Ernest, feeling awkward. "Thank you for the bread. It was delicious," said Emmanuel sincerely. There was a disconcerting calm about him. He didn't look like a broken young man on the street. There was no hatred or despair in his face, only peace. Mr. Ernest stood up slowly. He still had doubts, but also a new certainty that he couldn't ignore. He took a few steps and stopped. "I'll come back tomorrow," she said without looking at him. "I'll be here," Emmanuel replied, without raising his voice. And as he walked away, Mr. Ernest felt that something deep inside him had just opened up. He returned to the park every morning for the next 3 days, always with something in his hands, a loaf of bread, a piece of fruit, a blanket. And each time he arrived, Emmanuel greeted him with the same serene calm, as if he had been expecting him. They didn't talk much. Sometimes they shared long silences, gazing at the trees or listening to the birdsong. Other times, Emmanuel would utter phrases that seemed taken from an old book, but fit perfectly with what Ernest needed to hear. On the 4th day, as he was returning home with an empty thermos, he was intercepted by Mrs. Lucy, his neighbor across the street. She had a furrowed brow, and her arms crossed over her apron. "Mr. Ernest, is it true that you've been talking to a vagrant in the park?" she asked bluntly. He stopped. "He's not a vagrant," she replied. "He's a young man who needs help. Oh, please, those boys steal, do drugs, or worse. The other day, they stole Mr. Paul's watch in broad daylight, and Mrs. Trina said she saw him sleeping on the bench with a bottle hidden inside. Mrs. Lucy, you don't know him, and he doesn't know you. How do you know he won't get you into trouble? People like that don't change. They take advantage of the good ones." Mr. Ernest felt his shoulders tense, but he didn't answer. He didn't want to argue. He continued on his way without looking back. That day, while he was carving wood in the workshop, Mrs. Lucy's words echoed in his head. What if she was right? What if Emmanuel was pretending? What if he was using him to steal or something worse? He sighed and put the tools down on the table. He sat on the bench with his hands on his knees, looking at the figure he was sculpting. It had begun to take shape without him realizing it. A serene face, a short beard, closed eyes, very similar to the young man on the bench. "What if I'm deceiving myself?" he murmured. He barely slept that night. He dreamed of Mary's image, repeating her usual phrases. "Don't close your heart, Ernest. Not every saint comes dressed in a robe. Sometimes they come barefoot." The next morning he didn't go straight to the park. He walked through the neighborhood, thinking. He passed the parish, the bakery, the market, all the places he had always known. He overheard conversations as he passed, comments about him, lonely old men who affect anyone. Trusting others no longer came easily. They make themselves saints, then come the lamentations. He felt watched, judged, and yet something burned within him, a small but steady flame. He decided not to silence it. He returned to the park with a determined step. Emmanuel was there as always, now with his blanket over his legs, gazing. at the heavy sky. "Good morning, Mr. Ernest." The old man sat without answering. He observed him for a moment, and then said, "People are talking. They say you should stay away from me." Emmanuel turned his head and looked at him with a painful tranquility. "And you, what do you say, Mr. Ernest?" He swallowed hard. "I don't understand much, but I don't want to stay away." Emmanuel nodded as if he already knew. "Then it's decided." Mr. Ernest felt something loosen inside him, as if saying it aloud. Lessened his fear. "Don't disappoint me, young man. I've already lost too much in this life. I didn't come to take anything from you. Mr. Ernest, perhaps I came to remind you of something." The old man fell silent. He didn't quite understand the meaning of those words, but for the first time in a long time, he felt less alone. At dawn, intense, persistent rain fell, as if the sky had accumulated entire days of tears. The streets of Greenwich Village were drenched at dawn, puddles covering the sidewalks and a cold wind blowing through the bare trees of the park. Mr. Ernest looked out the window as he buttoned his coat. His chest tightened with an inexplicable worry. He hadn't slept well. He had dreamed of that serene face, shivering with cold under a thin blanket. He left home faster than usual. He carried an umbrella, an old sweater, and a bag with bread and a thermos full of hot broth. By the time he arrived at the park, the rain had already lessened. He walked with his shoes, getting wet to the bench, and there was Emmanuel, huddled up, soaked, his lips bluish and his blanket stuck to him from the rain. He was shivering. His eyes were closed, his skin pale, his breathing ragged. "Emmanuel!" shouted Mr. Ernest, dropping everything on the floor. The young man opened his eyes, barely spoke, looked at him as if his soul wanted to speak, but his body wouldn't respond. Mr. Ernest touched him. He was cold. "You can't stay here," he murmured, almost angrily. "Not like this. You won't survive another night." Emmanuel tried to say something, but his voice came out as a shapeless whisper. The old man hesitated for a second. He thought about the house, what the neighbors would say, what might happen if he let a stranger in. He thought about everything the city had taught him. Be wary. Protect yourself. Don't get involved. And yet, he carefully took him by the shoulders. "Come, I'll take you home." Emmanuel didn't protest. He could barely stand. Mr. Ernest helped him. Walk, step by step, in the rain. Some looked from the shop windows. Others avoided looking. Nobody said anything. Nobody offered help. They arrived home with difficulty. Mr. Ernest opened the door, guided him to the living room armchair, fetched towels, dry clothes, and a thick blanket. He turned on the heater, brought a bowl of broth, and offered it. "Here, it warms the soul." Emmanuel drank slowly, trembling. His hands began to steady. His cheeks regained color. "Thank you," he whispered. Without looking, Mr. Ernest sat down opposite, saying nothing, just observing. The scene was as strange as it was familiar, as if he had lived it in another life, in another time. "What's on your back?" he asked suddenly. Emmanuel hesitated to answer. "A scar." "Why?" "I got it for being in the right place at the wrong time." The old man frowned. The answer, given by anyone else, would have sounded evasive or ridiculous. In Emmanuel, it made sense, or at least something inside him felt that way. "Do you have a fever?" he asked. Emmanuel shook his head. Still, his eyes shone with a strange warmth, as if the fever were not of the body, but of the soul. "Why didn't you ask for help sooner?" "Because not everyone wants to see." Mr. Ernest remained silent. His mind was filled with warnings, fears, voices that had taught him not to trust. But his heart, felt a peace he hadn't known in years. "You stay here tonight," he said firmly. "We'll see tomorrow." Emmanuel looked at him. His eyes were so deep that Mr. Ernest felt them pierce through him. "Thank you, Mr. Ernest. Don't thank me. Just don't let me down." Emmanuel smiled, and for a moment the cold seemed to dissipate, not just in the air, but in the old carpenter's heart. The house had been silent for years. Not a physical silence, but that other, deeper silence that settles in when something essential is missing. Since Mary had died, every corner had breathed her absence. The walls no longer heard conversations, laughter, or old songs on the radio. Only the ticking of the clock, the creaking of the floorboards, and the wind coming in through the kitchen window. But that night, with Emmanuel in the armchair, wrapped in the blanket, something had changed. Mr. Ernest watched him from the living room door. It wasn't fear or discomfort. It was a strange mixture of peace and astonishment. The young man was sleeping soundly. His breathing was calm, and his face seemed clearer, more serene than in previous days. There was a comforting presence in his presence that made the house sigh. In the morning, the aroma of coffee filled the kitchen again. Mr. Ernest served 2 cups. Emmanuel was already awake, sitting with his hands crossed, looking at the wall as if reading something invisible. "Good morning," greeted the old man. "Good morning, Mr. Ernest," Emmanuel replied softly. "Coffee without sugar. Strong. That's how I like it." They drank in silence for a few minutes. Then Mr. Ernest mustered up enough energy to ask, "Do you have somewhere to go?" "Sometimes I think so, but when I get there, it's no longer there." The young man nodded slowly. He didn't fully understand the answer, but he wasn't surprised either. With Emmanuel, every sentence seemed to carry more than one meaning. "Do you know how to do anything? Have you worked anywhere?" "I know how to listen." Mr. Ernest gave a short laugh. "That doesn't pay the rent, but it calms hearts," replied the young man, without looking away. "Mr." Ernest observed him, then stood up and invited him into the back workshop. He opened the door, and the smell of old wood, varnish, and dust enveloped them. "I've spent half my life here," said the carpenter. "I used to make a table in 3 days. Now it takes me twice as long, but I can still carve a decent saint." Emmanuel ran his fingers over a half-finished wooden figure and smiled. "Did you do this?" "Yes, St. Francis. I started a year ago, but I stopped. I no longer have the patience." "It's not patience that's lacking. It's faith." The phrase touched him deeply. Mr. Ernest didn't know how to answer. He picked up a piece of cedar and extended it. "Here, see if you can do something with this." Emmanuel held the wood as if it were a sacred object. He closed his eyes for a moment and said, "Wood holds memories, just like us. This morning we worked together. Not much, just a few simple strokes. But something flowed. The wood yielded, the tools became light, and time dissolved." The afternoon, Mr. Ernest prepared rice with lentils. They ate slowly, talking about small things. The birds in the park, the colors of the sky, the taste of the pretzels on the corner. Emmanuel listened attentively, as if everything were important. "Have you always been like this?" the old man asked. "So quiet, so peaceful?" "Haste kills what is eternal," Emmanuel replied, "and the eternal does not shout." Mr. Ernest became thoughtful. That night, as he turned off the light, he perceived something he hadn't felt in years. The house no longer seemed so empty. As he lay down, he didn't pray, but for the first time in a long time, he gave thanks. Mr. Ernest awoke before dawn, enveloped in a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time. It wasn't restlessness or fear. It was something deeper, a memory seeping through the cracks of his soul. Emmanuel was still asleep in the armchair, covered up to his neck. His breathing was rhythmic, serene. There was no trace of suffering on his face, only rest. The old man went to the studio while it was still dim and lit the desk lamp. He sat down before the figure of St. Francis, the one that was only half finished, and observed each detail. He remembered when Mary used to sit beside him with a book and a mug of tea. "You make saints, but you lack understanding of them," she used to say with a smile. "It's not just the form, it's the presence." Mr. Ernest closed his eyes. Her voice came back clearly to my memory. That gentle tone, full of faith, the way she saw God in everything, in plants, in stray dogs, in the eyes of children, and above all in the poor. He recalled a conversation shortly before she fell ill. "Ernest, if one day you see someone who is hungry or cold, don't look the other way. Sometimes you can't help everyone, Mary. Not everyone. But whoever crosses your path, because they might be seeing Jesus and not know it. He promised her. Don't harden your heart. He promised and then quickly forgot. Until now. He stared at the wooden figure for a long time. Then he picked up the chisel and began to work. There was no sound except the scraping of the tool. Each line he drew was a thread that bound him to the forgotten promise, to the broken faith, and to that presence in the room that, without words, healed him. At dawn, Emmanuel got up and found him in the studio. "Didn't you sleep?" he asked in a calm voice. "I will sleep when my soul allows me." Emmanuel approached, looked at the figure, and nodded. "It has life now. Before, it only had form." Mr. Ernest looked serious. "You knew you would come to me, didn't you?" Emmanuel didn't answer immediately. He simply placed his hand on the carved wood. "Sometimes there's no need to search. Just wait with an open heart. I closed mine a long time ago, but you knew how to reopen it." The old man sighed. He didn't want to cry, but his throat burned. "I lost everything when she left. You didn't lose it. You just kept it in a deep place, and now you're remembering where." The phrase remained etched in his memory like fire. That afternoon, as they walked to the corner to buy bagels, a boy approached Emmanuel. He had dirty feet and patched clothes. He held out a wilted flower. "It's for you." Emmanuel bent down, received the flower as if it were a treasure, and smiled. "Thank you, brother," Mr. Ernest observed with a lump in his throat. The boy ran off happily. Emmanuel gazed at the flower as if it were sacred. "How do you do that?" the old man asked. "How do you make people feel seen?" "Because I see them." That night, before going to sleep, Mr. Ernest knelt beside his bed. He didn't pray from memory. He just whispered, "Thank you for reminding me of my promise, Mary." And he slept peacefully for the first time in years. The sun shone brightly that morning. After cloudy days, the blue sky was an unexpected blessing. Mr. Ernest looked up and on impulse invited Emmanuel. "Let's go downtown. It's been a while since I've walked there." Emmanuel smiled serenely. "Let's go." They took the subway at the West 4th station. Mr. Ernest hadn't used it in years, but he decided to take a chance. As they descended the stairs, the underground noise enveloped them. Donut vendors, street musicians with worn-out boomboxes, hurried people bumping into each other without looking. And yet, wherever Emmanuel went, something happened. People paused for a moment, looking as if recognizing something forgotten. They said nothing, but their gazes lingered a few seconds longer. Mr. Ernest noticed. They walked through the arts district among tourists, workers, and pigeons. They entered a diner near the square, which smelled of cumin, fried onions, and freshly made pancakes. They sat at a wooden table by the window. "What will you order?" asked Mr. Ernest. "The same as you." "I trust your taste." The old man smiled, flattered. He ordered eggs and bacon with toast and strong coffee. The waitress, a tired woman with large eyes, served quickly. When she looked at Emmanuel, she stopped. She stared at him as if her eyes were filling with tears for no reason. "Have we met before?" "No," Emmanuel replied softly. "But I know you." She remained motionless, smiled without knowing why, and returned to the kitchen. "What was that?" Mr. Ernest whispered to him. "Sometimes the soul recognizes before the mind." The old man shook his head, confused. "What are you, boy?" "Just someone who walks with his eyes open." After eating, they continued their walk, crossed Broadway, and entered the cathedral. Emmanuel walked slowly, without haste, as if each step were a prayer. He stopped before a side chapel and closed his eyes. Mr. Ernest watched, uneasy. A child ran down the hallway, tripped, and fell near them. Emmanuel crouched down, helped him up, and stroked his head. "Don't be afraid," he said. The boy stopped crying immediately. The mother arrived terrified, hugged her son, and seeing them, stood still. He looked at the two of them, then at Mr. Ernest. He said nothing, just nodded, and left holding hands with the child. They sat down to rest in the nearby square. Mr. Ernest took a sweet from his bag and offered it. "I'm not much of a traveler," but it was worth it. It's good to revisit places you've forgotten. Do you know this city? Emmanuel looked around as if he recognized every stone, every tree, more than one might imagine. The sun was setting, and the golden light painted the buildings and statues. Emmanuel saw everything with a serene nostalgia, like someone saying goodbye to something dear. Mr. Ernest felt a weight in his chest. There was something he didn't understand, something big and immense, nameless. Emmanuel was no ordinary young man. That much was beyond doubt, but even he didn't know what it was. What he did know for sure was that he didn't want to lose it. "Thank you for coming with me," he said. "Thank you for not leaving me alone," Emmanuel replied. They walked back in silence, and for the first time in many years, Mr. Ernest felt that the city center, the one he thought he knew by heart, had shown him something new, something inexplicable, but which he carried within himself. Sunday dawned cool, with clean air sweeping through the streets before the hustle and bustle began. Mr. Ernest and Emmanuel decided to return to Washington Square as in the early days. It was a way of closing the circle, the old man thought, although he didn't know why he felt something was about to change. Upon arriving, they settled on their usual bench. The place was lively, children playing, couples having coffee under the trees, musicians tuning guitars. Everything seemed ordinary. When a woman ran in weeping, with a boy in her arms shouting, "Someone please help," people turned curiously, but no one moved. Mr. Ernest immediately stood up. Emmanuel did too. The woman approached, breathless. The boy, about 5 years old, was pale, eyes closed, body inert. He had a dry, choking cough. "He's not breathing properly. He's turning purple," she cried. "Did you call an ambulance?" asked Mr. Ernest. "They're not answering. I don't know what to do." Then, without saying a word, Emmanuel bent down and took the child in his arms. The mother instinctively wanted to resist, but something in the young man's gaze stopped her. "Trust me," he said. She held the boy tenderly against her chest and placed her hand on his forehead. She closed her eyes. Mr. Ernest watched, paralyzed. There was something unusual about that gesture, something that sent shivers down his spine. For a few seconds, silence reigned. Even the children stopped running, and the musicians fell silent. The wind seemed to cease, and then the child coughed sharply twice. He opened his eyes. "Mother," he murmured. The mother fell to her knees, crying, embracing him without understanding what had happened. "What have you done?" she whispered, looking at Emmanuel. "I only reminded you to live," he replied sweetly. The woman wanted to speak more, but Emmanuel had already stood up and returned to the bench. Mr. Ernest remained standing, unable to move. He felt a knot in his stomach, as if mind and faith were dueling inside him. He looked at the child, breathing normally, as if nothing had happened. "Did you see that?" he asked almost voicelessly. Emmanuel did not answer. "Who are you?" Mr. Ernest insisted. "What are you doing here?" The young man lowered his head. Sometimes questions are born from fear, and fear prevents us from seeing. "Don't speak to me in riddles," the old man exploded. "I saw what you did. This is not normal. This is not human." Emmanuel raised his gaze with infinite tenderness. "And you think that the deepest part of humanity is not precisely the divine?" Mr. Ernest sat down trembling. "I wanted to understand, to believe. Reason couldn't find a way. You're driving me crazy, boy. I didn't come to confuse. I came to awaken." "Awaken from what?" "From oblivion." The old man rested his elbows on his knees and covered his face. He felt his heart overflowing, beating strongly. The child's mother approached to thank him. He touched Emmanuel's arm respectfully, as if he were before something sacred. Then he left, holding his son. Mr. Ernest looked up. Emmanuel was standing, gazing at the sky, as if listening to something in the distance. "Was it a miracle?" he asked. "What do you think, Mr. Ernest?" He didn't know how to answer. All I knew was that after that day, I couldn't see him the same way any more, neither him nor the world. That night, Mr. Ernest's house was filled with a new silence. It wasn't the dead silence of before, but a dense one, the kind that announces a revelation. After a quiet dinner, without many words, Emmanuel sat in the armchair, looking at the wooden figure that Mr. Ernest carved in his spare time. The old man, in turn, poured himself a small glass of whiskey and held it in his hands without drinking. "Today almost made me lose my mind," he said finally. "I've never seen anything like it." Emmanuel didn't answer immediately. He seemed to be waiting for Mr. Ernest to say more. "I've lived 82 years. I've seen good things, bad things, miracles perhaps, but today's is inexplicable." "Not all truths can be explained," Emmanuel said. "Some can be accepted." Mr. Ernest took a sip, closed his eyes, and breathed deeply. "I have things I haven't told anyone, burdens that accompany me like stones tied around my neck." Emmanuel nodded. "I'm listening." The old man leaned back, looking at the ceiling. "When Mary died, I left her alone, not physically, but in spirit. I was so broken that I didn't go with her. She departed in peace, knowing that I no longer believed, and that hurts more than anything else." "Why did you stop believing?" "I thought God had taken her, and when I saw so much suffering in the streets, in the hospitals, in the news, I thought that if God existed, he must be cruel or indifferent. And now?" Mr. Ernest looked him in the eyes. There was no anger, only a deep sadness, worn down by the years. "I think I know nothing, but since you arrived something in me has rekindled, something I thought was dead." Emmanuel breathed slowly and approached, sitting down opposite him. "You are not alone, you never were. Not even when you doubted, cursed, or cried in secret at the table." The old man looked astonished. "How do you know that?" "Because those who love don't leave. They only change form." Mr. Ernest felt his eyes fill with tears, lowered his head, put down his glass, and rested his hands on the table. "I was selfish. I judged others by my own wound. I closed the door to those who needed a word, a plate of food, a helping hand. I distanced myself from the church, from friends, from myself. I became a bitter old man. And now you come along with your enigmatic phrases and shake me up." "Leave," said Emmanuel, without pretending that everything would be. "Understood. Just live." There was a long silence. "And what if he's gone tomorrow?" asked Mr. Ernest fearfully. "Then he'll continue on his way with what we've already planted." He stood up, went to the workshop, and showed the figure he had carved. "I don't know if it's St. Francis or you, but it looks more and more like him each time." Emmanuel smiled. "Perhaps we are the same, at different stages of love." The old man laughed through tears. "You are unbearable with your enigmatic phrases, and too stubborn to give up." They stood there, looking at each other without saying more. The clock struck 11. Mr. Ernest turned off the light. And that night, the house was not a solitary refuge, but a silent temple. Monday dawned with a gray sky, as if the sun had forgotten to rise. Mr. Ernest woke early with a light heart, something he hadn't felt in a long time. He got up ready to prepare breakfast, eggs, toast, and strong coffee. He walked silently through the house, expecting to find Emmanuel in the armchair, but the seat was empty, the blanket carefully folded, the glass of water untouched on the table. Mr. Ernest frowned, went to the bathroom. Nobody, nothing. He went out to the patio. Silence. "Did you go out?" He called out voicelessly. There was no answer. He waited an hour, then two. He scanned the street, discreetly asking the neighbors. Mrs. Lucy looked suspicious. "That young man? I haven't seen him since Saturday." Anxiety grew. Mr. Ernest walked to the park, hopeful. He sat on the bench, watching each person pass by in search of that familiar silhouette. Nothing. He walked through the nearby streets, entered the parish, searched the market, the subway station, the square. Nothing. "Where are you, boy?" he murmured, his voice broken. He returned home at nightfall, his feet tired, his soul wounded. He sat before the wooden figure and gazed in silence. Now it was Emmanuel's face. There was no doubt. He felt anger. Why did it have to be like this? He came in, rummaged through everything, and disappeared. He threw the glass to the floor, shattering it, and let himself fall into the chair, head in his hands. Days passed, and no one saw Emmanuel again. Mr. Ernest clung to the possibility that he would return, but each morning without him weighed more heavily. He began to doubt himself. What if it had all been a figment of his weary mind? What if he had invented this character to fill the void? He remembered the sick boy. He searched for him, but found neither his mother nor anything else. People were saying different things. Some remembered the episode, others denied it. There were those who spoke of the mysterious young man who had healed a child. Others said it was pure invention. Uncertainty gnawed at him. One night, with his eyes fixed on the ceiling, Mr. Ernest whispered, "Mary, I don't know what's happening. I feel like something has been ripped from me. I don't understand anything." In his despair, he withdrew. He turned off the lights early, stopped going to the park. Even the workshop fell silent. The house seemed empty again until something happened. A letter with no return address, just a handwritten phrase in calligraphy that looked familiar. "He who has eyes, let him see. Whoever has a heart, remember." There was no signature. The next day, another letter. "You are not alone. You never were." Mr. Ernest began receiving one-a-day brief, profound phrases left under the door, among the plants in the mailbox. Some were biblical passages. Others, words that only Emmanuel had spoken. The last one made him tremble. Returning doesn't always mean going back. Sometimes it's awakening within yourself. That night he went to the armchair where Emmanuel used to sleep. He sat down, closed his eyes, and for the first time since the young man's departure, he felt no sadness. He felt presence. The letters stopped a week later, but something had changed in Mr. Ernest. He no longer waited sitting at the door, nor did he wander the neighborhood looking for him. Instead, he began to observe more, to listen, to notice small details, and these multiplied. First at the bakery, Mrs. Martha, who hadn't smiled since losing her husband, one day offered him an extra loaf of bread with a new smile. "Today I woke up with a lighter heart," she said. Later, a young man on the corner who used to beg for money, always frowning, accepted a bag of bread and fruit that he offered. The boy took it and before leaving said, "Thank you, Mr. Ernest. They said you understand." "Who told you that?" "A gentleman who passed by yesterday, tall, thin, strange look, said you are one of those who see." Mr. Ernest stood motionless. He felt a shiver down his spine. At the neighborhood church, which he hadn't entered for years, he decided to attend Mass on Sunday. He sat in the back seats. During the homily, the priest quoted exactly one of the phrases from the letter. Going back doesn't always mean returning. He saw it. Out the priest at the end. He was a young parish priest who had arrived a few months ago. When he asked about the phrase, the priest smiled. "It's in an old Franciscan manuscript. I haven't used it for years, but it came to mind this morning without explanation." Mr. Ernest left without speaking. He walked down the street, feeling that the world was different, or perhaps he himself was different, seeing the same world with different eyes. One afternoon, Mrs. Lucy knocked on the door with a strange expression, as if she were carrying something she didn't know how to let go of. "Mr. Ernest, I need to tell you something." He invited her in. Sitting in the kitchen, she took a deep breath. "I dreamt about that boy." Emmanuel sat beside me on a bench in silence. I was crying, I don't know why, and he simply said, "Don't judge yourself anymore. You've already been forgiven." Mr. Ernest fell silent. "I don't know why you told me that, but when I woke up, it was like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders." "Perhaps you already knew," he said softly. Mrs. Lucy lowered her eyes. "I spoke ill of him and of you. I thought I was fooling you. It wasn't just you. And now, where are you?" "Everywhere." She was confused. "Do you still see him?" "Not with my eyes, but with the one I had closed before." Mrs. Lucy said goodbye with a hug, the first in more than 20 years of neighborhood. After that, others began to recount similar experiences. A man felt a hand on his shoulder before, giving up on taking his own life. A girl claimed to have spoken to a thin angel who gave her a flower. A mother swore she heard a voice that showed her where to find her lost son. Mr. Ernest said little. He merely listened and returned home, to the workshop, and to the nearly finished wooden figure. Day after day he added a detail to the sculpture, not out of obsession, but out of gratitude, for in the mystery a truth had been revealed to him. Emmanuel had not departed. He had only changed form. Each sign, each account confirmed that the miracle had not ended. It had only begun. One Tuesday morning, Mr. Ernest felt the urge to return to the historic center. He didn't know why, only that he should walk those streets that had been part of his days with Emmanuel. He carried a notebook in his pocket to jot down stray thoughts and phrases that had come to him since the boy disappeared. The city maintained its constant noise, almost like background music. Amidst the coming and going of vendors, tourists, and cars, he walked to the cathedral. He wasn't looking for anything, but something guided him. He entered and felt the coolness of the stone. He sat on one of the sides, closed his eyes. He didn't pray. He just listened. "Excuse me, sir," said a voice beside him. He opened his eyes. It was a young seminarian with a kind face. "Can I help you with something?" "No, just resting. If you'd like, we're displaying documents and relics from an old out-of-state collection in the college sacristy, special things." Mr. Ernest hesitated, but something in his heart told him to go. They went into an adjoining room with stone walls and glass display cases. Old books, rosaries, chalices, and paintings. One of them made him stop. It was an oil on wood, darkened by time, depicting a thin man with a short beard, a white tunic and bare feet, sitting on a wooden bench. Beside him, an old man in a hat stared at him with wide eyes. Mr. Ernest felt his heart stop. "What is that?" he asked, his voice trembling. The seminarian explained. "It's one of the lesser-known representations of the itinerant Christ. They call it Jesus among the humble. It dates from a medieval period. It was found in a warehouse. Curiously, there were rumors that it depicted a scene in an old neighborhood of the city, although this is difficult to confirm." The old man approached the painting. The face, the expression, the gesture of the hands. It was Emmanuel. "May I stay here a moment?" he asked. "Of course." The seminarian stepped back respectfully. Mr. Ernest sat down and tears streamed down his face, uncontrollably. His chest tightened, not with sadness, but with certainty. "You were him," he whispered. From the first day he had known, felt it, but clung to doubt and fear. He recalled every word, gesture, and shared silence. He remembered the warmth of his voice, the way he looked at him, as if he had always known him, as if he loved him unconditionally. "He came to me, to a stubborn, bitter, and lonely old man. He came and embraced me without judgment. He saw me when I didn't see myself. He knelt before the painting, not in adoration of the image, but in surrender of his soul. Thank you for not letting me die inside, for rekindling me, for showing me that you weren't far away, just waiting for me to open my eyes." He stayed there for a long time in peace, more alive than ever. Upon leaving the church, the city light was no longer the same, nor was he. Mr. Ernest's house ceased to be a quiet refuge and gradually became a meeting place. It wasn't a planned decision. It all began with a boy asking for water, then a woman who needed rest, then a young man with nowhere to sleep. Mr. Ernest opened the door, like someone opening their heart. She prepared the yard with blankets, cleaned the old storage room, and filled it with mattresses. She cooked rice, beans, bread, and every night someone knocked on the door. "Here, nobody judges," she said. "We listen, have a hot meal, and breathe." The neighbors initially whispered, but soon gathered around. Mrs. Lucy arrived with a pot of soup. Mr. Paul offered to fix the leaks. A young unemployed man painted the facade without charging. "Why are you doing this, Ernest?" asked a former colleague from the market. "Because someone did it for me when I needed it most." Even without explanations, his face said it all. He was different, full of light and purpose. He walked upright, smiled more, listened without interrupting. His faith, the one buried for years, was now manifesting itself in actions, not words. Each morning began in the workshop. The carefully carved figure of Emmanuel was ready. He had decided not to sell it or give it away. He placed it in a corner of the room, in front of the window, not as an object of devotion, but as a living reminder of what he had lived through. "You saw me," he would say softly. "That's why I learned to see." One day, a young mother arrived at the shelter with 2 children. She came from the south, fleeing the violence. Mr. Ernest greeted her with a blanket and a hot meal. Through tears, she confided, "A man on the bus told me to come here, that you would open the door." "Which man?" "I don't know. Tall, thin, with a strange look. He said you were already expecting me." Mr. Ernest felt a lump in his throat. He simply nodded. Welcome. Each story that arrived had in common pain, loss, and abandonment, and yet hope, as if all the broken paths led to that door. "This is no longer my house," Mr. Ernest would say. "It's a station for souls." The young parish priest visited him one afternoon. "They say you're a carpenter." "I used to be. I still am sometimes. I wanted to ask for something special. We are opening a community dining hall, and we would like you to sculpt a Christ for the altar." Mr. Ernest hesitated. "I don't know if I can." "You don't just carve wood, you tell stories in silence." He agreed. For weeks, he worked on a new piece. This time, it wasn't the traditional image of the crucified Christ. He was a barefoot man, simply dressed, sitting on a bench with a slight smile. The priest looked at him at the end and said, "This is not the Christ I expected, but this is the one we needed." Mr. Ernest smiled. He also came, and many did not see him. At night, with the house quiet and the children sleeping in the yard, Mr. Ernest sat before the figure of Emmanuel. He said nothing. He took a deep breath. He knew his time on earth wasn't eternal, but for the first time he wasn't afraid to leave, because he had found the meaning he had sought his whole life, and in that sense, love remained alive. Over time, the shelter continued to function. Others took the lead. Young people, inspired by his example. He left simple instructions. Never close the door to those who arrive with their hearts in their hands. And one day, Mr. Ernest no longer woke up. He departed in peace, with the gentle smile of one who knows he has fulfilled his mission. At the funeral, there was silence, not of sadness, but of reverence. Neighbors, strangers, mothers, the elderly, children, and even people from other cities who never knew him personally attended, but said they had arrived on the recommendation of someone who showed them the way. And many swore that, in a corner of the wake, a young man in a light-colored robe watched with eyes full of love. Over time, Emmanuel's figure was placed at the entrance of the shelter, and a small plaque installed below. Mr. Ernest opened the door. You too can open yours. For there are stories that don't end when someone leaves. There are lives that become seeds. And when faith is lived out in actions, it leaves eternal roots. If this story touched your soul, subscribe to the channel to receive more stories like this, which remind us that there is still light in the world. And don't forget to click on the suggested video, where you will learn about another true story that can change the way you see life.